Every country has debt. Every government borrows. But few realize that debt isn't just about funding projects or paying bills. Debt is a tool, sometimes a weapon, used to maintain power, influence citizens, and even control the future. This is the story of how governments use debt to stay in power. From ancient empires to modern states, governments have faced one constant challenge: money doesn't grow on trees. Armies need funding. Infrastructure must be built. Politicians need to satisfy citizens. But tax revenue is limited, unpopular, and politically costly. Governments discovered a simple solution: borrow first, pay later. Borrowing allowed rulers to expand their influence without raising taxes immediately. It allowed kings to fight wars, empires to conquer, and modern states to fund social programs, all while appearing prosperous. Debt became a tool to buy time, maintain loyalty, and consolidate power. Debt in ancient times, debt isn't new. Even Mesopotamian kings borrowed from temples. Temples acted as banks, lending grain or silver to fund public works and military campaigns. Failure to repay could mean seizure of property or harsh penalties, but the system allowed rulers to project power beyond their immediate resources. In Rome, public debt financed conquest. Citizens lent money to the state, often to fund wars. In return, they received interest and political influence. Debt allowed emperors to build roads, aqueducts, and armies, and, importantly, to maintain control without constantly overtaxing citizens. The principle is simple: if citizens or elites are creditors, they have a vested interest in supporting the state. Debt aligns private interests with government survival. Medieval and early modern governments. During the Middle Ages, European monarchs relied on loans from merchants and banking families. The Medici in Florence, for example, lent to kings across Europe, funding wars and political campaigns. Monarchs could not simply print money like today. Borrowing gave them flexibility. Governments also used debt to reward allies. Lending to a monarch could secure land, titles, or political favors. Those who provided credit had influence. Those who did not risked exclusion. In this way, debt became a political tool, a mechanism to consolidate power and loyalty. By the 17th century, the rise of central banks formalized this system. The Bank of England, created in 1694, lent money to the government in exchange for bonds. These bonds funded wars against France, and the bank gained authority over national finance. Debt and governance became inseparable. Debt as political leverage. Modern governments use debt not just for finance, but for political leverage. Large deficits allow politicians to promise public services, tax cuts, or subsidies without immediate taxation. Borrowing shifts the cost to future generations, delaying political consequences. This strategy has three main effects: maintaining popularity. Citizens enjoy benefits now, paying later. Politicians gain approval while deferring responsibility. Controlling elites. Governments borrow from wealthy individuals, banks, and corporations. Creditors' interests align with the state, creating a network of influence and support, creating dependency. A heavily indebted country relies on lenders for survival. This can influence domestic policy and foreign affairs. Debt becomes not just a financial instrument, it becomes a tool of control. Debt in modern history. Consider post-World War II governments. Europe was devastated. Infrastructure destroyed. Citizens impoverished. Governments borrowed massively from allies, institutions, and citizens to rebuild economies. This debt allowed governments to restore stability, fund welfare programs, and consolidate political legitimacy. The United States leveraged debt similarly. Government borrowing during World War II via war bonds mobilized citizens, aligned economic interests, and financed the war effort without massive inflation. Debt strengthened patriotism and maintained domestic support for political leaders. Debt also allowed governments to manage crises. When recessions hit, states borrowed to stimulate economies, keeping citizens employed and content. In this way, debt becomes both shield and sword, protecting political power while projecting strength. Debt, inflation, and power governments often manage debt through inflation. By printing more money, they can reduce the real burden of repayment. Citizens and creditors may receive less in real value, but the government survives politically. This tactic is risky. If mismanaged, it can lead to hyperinflation, unrest, or loss of legitimacy. But carefully calibrated, it allows governments to maintain control over time, using debt strategically to balance short-term stability with long-term repayment. Debt as a geopolitical tool that is also used on the global stage. Powerful nations lend to weaker countries through bilateral loans, international institutions, or bonds. These loans often come with conditions influencing policy, trade, or governance. Examples: post-colonial development loans in the 20th century often required structural reforms. International aid through institutions like the IMF ties financial support to compliance. Strategic lending ensures weaker nations remain dependent, extending the lender's geopolitical influence. Debt becomes a subtle but powerful way to exercise control without military force. The cycle of debt and power debt is not inherently negative. It enables governments to invest, expand, and stabilize. But it also creates cycles. Governments borrow to fund programs or crises. Citizens or creditors gain dependence or influence. Debt grows, creating leverage. Political leaders maintain or consolidate power. If mismanaged, debt can trigger crises, defaults, or political upheaval. Understanding this cycle is essential to understanding modern politics. Almost every major financial decision, from interest rate policy to stimulus spending, is influenced by political calculus and the need to maintain power. Debt in today's world, in the 21st century, government debt has reached unprecedented levels. Nations like the United States, Japan, and many European countries carry debts in the trillions of dollars. Why? Because debt allows governments to fund massive infrastructure projects, support social programs, stimulate economies during crises, influence citizens and global markets. Debt also fuels political strategy. Governments calculate how much debt citizens can tolerate, how much markets will allow, and how much leverage is politically useful. Lessons from history: debt is power. Control over money allows governments to influence citizens, elites, and allies. Debt shapes politics. Borrowing decisions determine public policy, social programs, and military campaigns. Debt carries risk. Mismanagement can lead to inflation, defaults, or political collapse. Debt is a tool, not just a burden. Strategic use of borrowing sustains power and shapes societies. From ancient Mesopotamia to modern superpowers, history shows that debt is as much political as it is financial. It is a mechanism of control, a lever of influence, and sometimes a weapon. Conclusion: governments will always need money. Taxes, trade, and borrowing are inevitable. But debt is more than a financial necessity. It is a tool for survival, influence, and dominance. Every bond issued, every loan negotiated, and every stimulus package carries a hidden truth. Debt is a means to maintain power. Those who control borrowing lending, and repayment influence the fate of nations and citizens alike. The next time you hear about national debt, deficits, or bonds, remember, behind every number is a story of power, politics, and survival. Debt isn't just finance. It is the quiet engine that keeps governments in control. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the hidden power of government debt, like, subscribe, and stay with us as we uncover more secrets of money, power, and history that shape the world.